Hey everyone, welcome, welcome. Um, I'm going to just start inviting our speakers today to join me up on stage. Thank you, Anna. See that you've already requested. Hi, Anna, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for joining. We're so excited to have you come in. We know we've been talking with the CoWSwap team for quite some time about intents. And yeah, I'm just happy that this has finally come together. I know we've been kind of chatting about potentially having one of these intense-based AMAs for quite some time.
Awesome. Yeah, excited for today's session.
Hey, Anna.
And Hart.
Hey, Amanda.
Hey, how are you doing?
Great. Yeah, I'm excited for this too. So yeah, thank you, Amanda, for setting this up. Thank you, Anna and Fran, for joining. It's gonna be fun.
Well, Fran, I'll bring you up as a speaker as well. Hart, by the way, thank you so much for joining. It's so early for you, GM. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize the time zone was that off.
No, it's good. Morning time is good. And these are my favorite people to talk with. So I'm sure I'll be energized. Maybe after like the first 5 minutes, I'll be going. So.
Okay, nice. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for waking up early and starting your day off right with an intense chat. Fran, where are you calling in from?
I'm currently in Spain, so it's afternoon for me.
Perfect. Well, yeah, buenos dias, and thanks so much for joining as well. So I guess we can just jump right in. Just for those of you who aren't familiar, maybe we can start with Anna from CoWSwap. If you could just give us a bit of an introduction of yourself and what CoWSwap is.
Sure, happy to. So I am CEO of CoWSwap, and I have been working on Ethereum since 2017. Initially, I joined Gnosis, and that was responsible, really cross-functional. Obviously, we were also working on the Gnosis Safe, on prediction markets, and the predecessor of what today is CoWSwap. And about a little over 2 years ago, me and my co-founder Felix then decided to spin out of Gnosis with CoWSwap, and since then have been growing a substantial team that is working on pushing this decentralized exchange forward. To the outside, to the normal user experience is simply CoWSwap is just providing a seamless trading experience like any other DEX that you know, like UniSwap, 1inch, and so on. But under the hood, it provides a sophisticated order flow auction, which guarantees users to always obtain the best possible price. And how it works essentially on a quick, brief, high level is that the user no longer publishes a fee-paying transaction to the public mempool, but instead the user signs a message that is submitted to an off-chain relayer, which handles the transaction execution for them. And this intent-based trading is now a concept that has also been adopted by both 1inch Fusion and more recently also by UniSwap X. However, I think there's still one significant differentiating factor to those two protocols, where I would say the real innovation still lies, which is that CoWSwap also enables batching. CoWSwap looks for so-called coincidence of ones, or in short, CoWs. This is also where the name CoWSwap is coming from, before sending the user's transactions to a regular on-chain exchange. So, for example, if a user wants to buy ETH at a certain price and another user wants to sell it, usually these two orders would both be matched against automated market maker, like let's say Balancer or Uniswap, individually. But on CoWSwap, these two orders can be matched without paying any LP fees, without having to match them against an on-chain AMM liquidity pool. And by matching these two orders directly together, the user saves some money. They save the LP fees that are otherwise incurred, and they also save on gas costs. CoWSwap has these so-called solvers that can look at the transactions that are collected and submit optimal matchings for these orders. And they are matched under the guarantee that CoWSwap gives all the transactions that are part of one batch a uniform clearing price. And this is actually a very interesting point and differentiating factor for us, is that by settling all transactions within a single same price within one block on Ethereum, it means there's also no point of reordering transactions anymore. And if you know a little bit about MEV, you know that by reordering transactions, this is how the problem of MEV, of front-running attacks, of how sandwich attacks are occurring. And this is a problem that is solved by the design of CoWSwap. And yeah, I think that's a high-level summary of what CoWSwap is and how it differs from UniSwap and 1inch.
Yeah, definitely a lot of differentiating factors, and yeah, quite frankly, pioneers in the intents-based DeFi platform realm. So yeah, we really thank you for joining. Next, we'll have Fran, if you can step on up and give us a bit of an introduction of yourself and Superfluid.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Francesco. I'm one of the founders of Superfluid. I've been in crypto for about 6 years at this point, since 2017. Started Superfluid about 3.5 years ago. And effectively, Superfluid is it's a payment protocol. We created a protocol that allows what we call money streams, so ongoing flows of tokens, which are mainly used for payments. I'll add in a bit, maybe a connection to what we were talking about before about trading, but generally most of the usage of Superfluid is for payments. So anything from people paying people, so things like payroll, to people paying businesses, so subscriptions. We've recently launched a subscription product that is being used by a few companies in the space to effectively accept recurring payments. And all of what we do at Superfluid is happening fully on-chain. So it's quite different to all the intents-based architectures. Everything we do is on-chain. Everything we do is transparent. It's fully composable. And it's all, I guess, a bit old school in terms of how it's executed. Now, we're looking very keenly at the intent space. We're talking a lot with Hart also about cross-chain, trying to understand how we can bring this kind of way of thinking. Because as we develop a cross-chain and multi-chain future, payments are going to get increasingly hard to do because of how complex the whole experience is, right? Everybody's going to have wallets on different chains, different currencies on different chains. Merchants are going to want to be paid in different chains. And the whole thing is going to get incredibly messy. And I think it's very important for us to kind of move faster than that trend and try and figure out what the best experience is. And I think intents play a huge role there. And that's something we're trying to kind of figure out so that we can still keep providing the best payment experience for merchants that we can. Talking about trading, which I think is something that's closer to most people's minds in crypto. We don't have a payment trading product first party. Like Superfluid itself is just a protocol. We don't build trading venues, but there is a company building on top of Superfluid, which is called Aqueduct, who are building I think one of the most interesting AMMs out there, which also has some elements of CoWs, so some elements of coincidence of wants, and basically it's a dollar cost averaging AMM, where users stream money to an AMM and always buy the average price. And what this means is that users who are trading in opposite directions, every block are matched every block. And as a result, they never actually suffer from MEV. So because they're trading over time, you can think of it as some mini batch auctions happening at every block automatically. So it's a bit similar to maybe, if people remember how it worked, Gnosis protocol, so the predecessor to CoWSwap, in that they're basically batch auctions. Gnosis protocol, I think, was every 15 minutes or every hour. In the case of Aqueduct, it's every block, and the trades happen in a continuous manner. So I think it's an interesting example of how you can actually solve a lot of problems on chain if you approach the problem in a very different way. So you couldn't possibly, build Uniswap on chain to be MEV resistant, but you can make trades over time MEV resistant if you build the protocol the right way. So I think it's always important to highlight that there are different solutions to the same problems. And very excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you here too. I think it's an interesting problem to solve. It's almost hard to wrap your head around how Intents could be incorporated in something like a Venmo payment system as well. So that'd be really cool to hear your thoughts on that a little bit more in depth. And then Hart, if we could hear a bit from you, a quick introduction, and if you want to introduce Across for anyone who's visiting and isn't familiar.
Yeah, sure, Amanda. I'll keep it short so we can jump into the meaty questions. It's super cool to get to chat with Anna and Fran, who are big brands and really cool people in the space. So I'm one of the co-founders of Across. Across is a cross-chain bridge. And I think the reason why we're here and talking about Intents, and what we can get into more, is how I think this Intents-like architecture makes a lot of sense in a cross-chain space, in particular. And from the perspective of how Across the cross-chain bridge works, I think we'll probably get into more defining what this all means and looks like. But in our design, a user that wants to bridge is in essence specifying an intent. It's like, here's what I want to do, but it can't be executed on a single chain because it's a cross-chain thing. Definitionally, we're like, okay, this other thing has to happen elsewhere. And what Across is sort of doing, if you squint, is it's sort of Intents-like in the sense that a user is specifying the action they want to do, and then this relayer or third-party actor is competing to fulfill that intent or that action, which in this context is this cross-chain bridge. What I think we can get into is how that all works. What we've seen with Across is that from a cross-chain bridging perspective, this architecture is actually hyper efficient and very cheap. I do think it has all the right trade-offs in terms of speed, cost, and security. And maybe we can get into more like why we think that is too. I'll stop there.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, that was really perfect intro to Across for any of you who haven't tried us out yet. Hopefully that entices you to give us a try. But moving on to the more meatier questions, I wanted to ask Anna about CoWSwap, just for anyone who doesn't understand. Could you maybe just do a quick explainer, like a comparison of what I know you did briefly mention it a little bit earlier in your intro, but if you could explain the difference between performing a swap on CoWSwap versus a UniSwap. And just out of curiosity, now that Intents is more of a hot topic, and we've seen the big announcement from UniSwap X implementing Intents-based trading, have you noticed any more ease of onboarding since people have become more familiar with the concept?
Cool. So obviously doing transaction management on Ethereum is extremely difficult for users, and there's a lot that can go wrong. Looking at the example of trading in the traditional transaction model, that basically how you would place a transaction on the normal Uniswap v4 or on the normal 1-inch mode, is requiring the user to commit to fixed parameters, meaning you don't only have to pick the trading pair, but you also have to pick a slippage tolerance, you have to pick an execution path. In the case of 1-inch, you need to commit on, 50% of my trade is going to be submitted via Uniswap, 25% via Balancer, another 25% via SushiSwap, and then this is fixed. And And then also it means that you are paying for a transaction cost, regardless whether the transaction is being submitted successfully or not. With the intents-based architecture that CoWSwap is using, you have a much more flexible framework that allows users to express their preferences, where instead of signing the Ethereum transactions, they only sign a message that is then handed over to our third party. In our case, it's the solvers that are then dealing with the sophisticated transaction management for the user. And going back to the example of CoWSwap specifically, this means that as a user, you can pick whatever high slippage tolerance you want to. Usually you on UniSwap or OneInch, you would try to pick a very low slippage tolerance because that is essentially the price impact that can be exploited by external parties. So you try to minimize it as much as possible in order to not be exploited and not lose any money to third-party MEV bots. The issue with that, however, is if you pick a slippage tolerance that goes closer to 0, is that, of course, there is a lot of price fluctuations, even within a single Ethereum block. So that means the lower the slippage you set, the higher the likelihood that your transaction can actually not be executed. Hence, what would happen then is you paid for transaction costs, but your order failed. And then the other example of on OneInch, where you essentially, it is a DAX aggregator similar to CoWSwap, but with the difference that you commit to a specific execution path. Now, think about a scenario where, for example, you would be using a safe multi-signature wallet, and it takes some time for you to collect everyone's signature to co-sign a transaction. If this takes 30 minutes or even longer, most likely the execution path that you initially picked when wanting to place the order via OneInch is likely expired already, or it's definitely not the most advanced or in the best interest of the user anymore to pick the same execution path. And so with intents, and on CoWSwap specifically, the user just expresses their preference of what is the minimum they're willing to receive, and then the protocol holds the solvers accountable by running this order auction that follows the criteria of this optimization criteria of the solver who finds the best possible execution path for the user is the one that wins the order auction. And in this way, CoWSwap is able to provide a much more flexible trading experience for the user, where the user doesn't have to be sophisticated. The user doesn't have to know even what MEV is or what the risks behind it are, doesn't have to know much about slippage tolerance or what is a good execution price at the moment. But the user can relax, rest assured that the protocol is taking care for them and executes the transaction in their best possible interest.
Perfect. And just out of curiosity, like kind of the second part bonus question was just because it was such a novel concept when CoWSwap was released, have you noticed that now that since people are a bit more familiar with intents, has it been like an easier onboarding situation for new users?
I would expect. Sorry for leaving out this question. I would expect it to happen for sure, but since the launch of UniSwap X, we haven't noticed a big difference yet. I would expect this is probably down the line to happen because, of course, correct, that the experience is different. And most users right now, they go into the space, the first time they hear about UniSwap, this is where they place their first trade. This is how they're used to handling transactions. And then if they go to CoWSwap, so far this has always been a reason for confusion if suddenly you're not required to send a normal Ethereum transaction anymore, but rather sign a message. So that is definitely something that was a hurdle for adoption. And I guess we will see, I think it will still take a few months for UniSwap X to gain more adoption. Even OneInch Fusion didn't receive so much adoption yet. I think they launched December or so last year. But I think it would still require some time, as there's not many new users coming into the space currently. So I think for us to notice a difference will still take some time. But what I would say already is that we are obviously constantly in contact with other wallets and DeFi aggregators that are considering integrating CoWSwap. And this different onboarding experience had thus far been mentioned sometimes as a reason for why they wouldn't want to incorporate CoWSwap yet, because it would provide a user experience that is on the one hand sophisticated or superior, but on the other hand, it's not what users are used to, and hence always adds a new complexity level to some extent. And speaking to those wallets, after the UniSwap X announcement had been made, a few of them came back to us and were like, well, yes, now we actually will have to adapt the onboarding flow for users. So now this is if 1inch and Uniswap are going the same route, they're going the intent-based route, we will have to change this user flow for our users anyways. So I think it helps for sure. It helps to down the line convince more product or more DeFi aggregators and wallets to adapt to the CoWSwap model, to the intent-based model, and integrate CoWSwap. Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting. It seems like the people that are in the space just kind of comfortable with what they're used to, but when we see more actors like moving into a direction, it's when people are more willing to tackle the learning curve of something new. So, okay, thanks for that question, or that answer, sorry. Next for Francesco, I have a question. You had mentioned in your introduction that Superfluid is a bit more old school. So I was wondering how the evolution into this like multi-chain world, and now even further moving into like intent-based finance, how that is sort of like shaking up the mechanisms at Superfluid.
Yeah, well, I mean, we designed Superfluid for Ethereum, right? And at the time, there was one chain, one blockchain, and a few DeFi protocols on it. And I guess that that's not the case anymore. And now we have to adapt to the fact that we've deployed to 9 different networks, and all those different deployments are, unfortunately, at the moment, quite isolated, right? So if you open a stream to pay someone on Polygon, your stream is completely isolated from your balance on Optimism, for example, right? So the money does not move on its own across chains, and you need to go back to the kind of more traditional transaction-based approach if you do want to move it, right? And what I mean by that is with streams, you have this sort of autonomous on-chain automation, right? Let's say I want to subscribe to a product and the merchant accepts payments on Polygon. I'll open a stream on Polygon, and then every second the merchant will get paid, and the stream will go on forever, as long as I have funds. And because of this, as a user, I get this really good experience where I don't need to effectively do anything, and the payment is moving on its own. The funds are moving on their own, right? It's a really, really neat experience for a user, and it's fully decentralized. Now, the problem is users in the current paradigm have wallets and have funds in a bunch of different networks, and suddenly they need to move funds around to make sure that that wallet on Polygon is still funded, so that that payment can effectively keep going, right? The payment itself will keep going, but if it runs out of funds, it will stop, right? So we need to make sure that the user always has funds. And for this, we developed a strategy that is currently still single chain, right? So that if a user has a different token in their wallet, basically an off-chain agent can, effectively evaluate the user's intention to keep the stream going and top up that user's balance. And we use this quite often. So across all our payroll investing products, it works like this, so the user doesn't have to think about it. And if their balance is running low, it will automatically be topped up. However, doing this cross-chain would be the next step, right? So if a user has funds on Optimism and a stream running low on Polygon, those funds can be moved off across the chain and top up that wallet. Unfortunately, this is pretty complicated to do. And the experience that you want to provide to a user right now is almost impossible to provide in a clean way, right? You can do it, but it requires a ton of transactions or a ton of signatures from users, which effectively make it rather complicated. But to describe what the ideal scenario looks like in the future, users can open streams from any blockchain to any blockchain, pay merchants in any currency, and know that their funds will always be automatically moved across chains to keep those streams going, so that as long as, until the user kind of actively closes a subscription, that subscription will keep going. And in this case, you can think of it as what we're looking for is a way for users to, let's say, signal the intent to keep their streams going and delegate to off-chain solvers, or whatever you want to call them, the job, the task to keep those streams funded. And this is kind of going down into trying to provide a much better UX to users. So it's not about helping users trade, right? But it's about using user funds to keep payments going. But interestingly, to do that, we're going to end up using the same architecture, right? Because if the user is streaming in USDC, but their funds on the different chain are in Ether, what we need is effectively a cross-chain, a cross-chain trade that settles in USDC on Polygon. And that looks very similar, in my opinion, to an intent, except it's got a different kind of reason to be, a different timing constraint. And interestingly, but otherwise interestingly, looks quite similar.
Oh, wow. No, that really does. And I love that you highlighted the top up feature, because I know for myself, when I open Midjourney and I don't know, I didn't pay an invoice, it's a nightmare to like go back and redo all that stuff. So it's really great that it's all automatic. But you brought up a good problem, which is now introducing like cross-chain swaps to get the right token in the right place. And then I'll move the stage over to Hart, which is the next question about why the cross-chain intents problem is something that is so important to solve, and sort of what your thoughts are on what a solution could potentially look like.
Yeah, this is a super fun conversation to have with Fran and Anna too. So listening to both Fran and Anna speak, I'm trying to think about how to describe this problem in a cross-chain space. And I guess the way to think about it is like, if you think about a single blockchain and a transaction, we do have actors competing to fulfill that transaction, and those are the miners or validators of that blockchain, right? So that's literally what a blockchain does. The transaction comes in, user says they want to do this thing, and then the miners and validators that achieve consensus on that blockchain execute that transaction or not. And if you think about now doing cross-chain communication, we don't have by default any actor that is going to go and do this cross-chain action, because like these blockchains are disconnected. And what I think Across is doing, this is sort of one way to think about or describe it, is we are creating a protocol or a system that incentivizes these off-chain actors to go and do this cross-chain action that the user wants to do. And it's not as specified as a transaction on a single blockchain, because we don't like the Across protocol isn't specifying exactly these like super strict kind of consensus rules. Instead, we're specifying an action or an intent that a user wants to accomplish, and we are offering some incentive. In this case, it's a fee for these off-chain actors to go and do this cross-chain like linking intent or action. And yeah, so I kind of almost want to say that like you can think of intents as this like glue that links actions between blockchains, or intents is one way to describe this glue that links actions between blockchains. And it's pretty interesting to think about this and think about the relevance to how this pattern works in a single chain context for like CoWSwap and all that too. Actually, Amanda, I kind of wanted to hijack your conversations and ask one question to both like Fran and Anna, which has been on my mind, which is like when we do these intent style systems, we are incentivizing like a third party actor to be this relayer, market maker, filler, whatever you want to call it. And at times I worry that this will create some vector for centralization, where this third party actor might be, professionalized or kind of an expert at how to do this. And we end up creating a reliance or dependency on this third party to fulfill, to function in this specialized role. And I guess like, Anna, for you and CoWSwap in particular, because I know you guys are sort of decentralization maximalists by philosophy. How do you guys think about the sort of potential centralization vectors of like this off-chain infrastructure or market makers or relayers?
Yeah, in the case of CoWSwap, it would be essentially the solvers, the parties that are handling the transaction management for user orders. And I mean, of course, this has been something that has been flagged a few times, whether we see that this becomes a centralization risk. And of course, to some extent, I would say it is comparable with, even if you compare it with searchers or block builders in Ethereum, of how, of course, if certain players are significantly more sophisticated than others, then at least in some areas, or in our case for certain trading types or certain token types, they might be more sophisticated in finding better solutions than others, and they grow a larger share of the transaction flow. But on CoWSwap, essentially, I think we have around 17 external servers at the moment that are all running in parallel, and of course, some are a bit more sophisticated or successful than others. But we also have a few servers that simply run, well, we call them like baseline. They're responsible for baseline liquidity. Like anyone can essentially run a server. And the simplest way would be to just connect to the 0x API, or to the 1inch API, or even combine several APIs and then always select which one has the best possible execution route. And in that way, on like not all token trades are so complicated to compete on. And so I think that like having this ability to compete in the market with like a baseline solution that still can win a significant amount of the competitions is one way of how you can also counter this centralization concern, because you will still have the ability for a lot of players to participate in this competition. But I would say where it can get maybe more tricky is if you think about, or if you're a solver that specializes in, for example, specific tokens, like subsets of tokens from a protocol, AUSD or whatever, that not every solver has integrated that, then they for sure have a strategic advantage at the beginning by having like less solvers that are competing on those tokens. But for that, we are also considering working on an LP book that makes it easier for any external protocol to integrate their own liquidity. So in a way that it becomes, so if any new protocol that launches, any new liquidity source that launches can themselves integrate into this LP book, making thus their liquidity available to the solvers. And that should also overcome part of the problem of some solvers being faster than others in integrating new liquidity sources, because this would give protocols, liquidity protocols, the opportunity to ensure all solvers equally have access to their liquidity.
Yeah, cool. That makes sense to me. Amanda, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt too much.
No, that was such a good question. Honestly, I don't know, Fran, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that about, potentially this third party really centralizing everything when it comes to these, cross-chain intent swaps?
I think it's a really good question. And I think it's important, as Anna said, to make efforts to make everything as transparent and accessible as possible. But at the same time, I don't share the fear that Hart has, because to be completely honest, if in the absence of barriers to entry, which are like real barriers to entry, here in this case, it's just expertise and knowledge, right? But apart from that, there's no barrier to entry to become a solver or become a relayer or any of these kind of jobs. And they're fairly unspecialized in a lot of senses and replicable. I just can't imagine it becoming overly centralized. What it could be is cartelized, right? But even then, I don't think anybody can have that kind of huge advantage personally, because it's always people. And if somebody in an organization has some sort of advantage, they could always just kind of slip out of that organization and create their own competitors. So I'm not too worried about it personally. But at the same time, we built Superfluid to not have any external actors involved. And I think that's, when designing this stuff is always a good design goal to follow.
So Fran, I agree with you in the single chain context. It's just like expertise and I forget, you said it elegantly, but it's just expertise really and knowledge that lets you be a solver. In the cross-chain context though, there is also an element of capital and like efficient kind of inventory management or efficient management of your capital across chains. And that's where I get a little bit more worried. Like UniSwap X being a market maker on that in the cross-chain context, or actually across too, it requires some capital, and the better market makers or the better relayers, solvers are going to be better at managing where their capital is across various chains. And that's the aspect that in the cross-chain world, I worry a little bit more about getting centralized, just to be specific around that.
That's really interesting. I wonder if as we develop further on that kind of intent-based architectures, and you can start doing things like intent-based borrowing and lending across chains, maybe the liquidity provider or market maker that you mentioned might prefer to just lend out their capital on that chain and not develop that expertise. And then again, it becomes again an expertise game for people to just borrow the money where it's needed without having capital, right? So
yeah, and that's the kind of like world I really like. Like one of the things that I thought was just so cool about DeFi is the barriers to entry to be an arbitrager or a market maker or a market participant were so low. Like it really could be the analogy I always told like all my traditional finance friends is like, a 14-year-old in their basement could be the one executing these giant arbitrage trades because they're able to use flash loans and borrow infinite capital and execute everything atomically in a single chain context in like DeFi. And so the thing that leaves me a little bit nervous is that I think this cross-chain stuff requires this capital because we can't atomically do things in the same way. And I worry a little bit that the intent-based architecture, which I think naturally fits in this multi-chain world, ends up being like professionalized with the crypto equivalent of like Jump Trading or Citadel, who are just really good at utilizing their capital to offer, to create a barrier to entry for other players. And so this is just the one thing that I think it's solvable, but I kind of want to be attacking, or as we go down this intense architecture in the multi-chain world, I think we should be super conscious of trying to to minimize the barriers to entry to be these solvers, relayers, market makers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think really good concerns because, yeah, with the scalability issue being solved, there arises a new problem of liquidity fragmentation. But I do like, Francesco, I do like your optimism that, yes, we can all band together and come up with a solution and make sure that there's not one player kind of monopolizing the capital game across chain. But, we're talking about intents today. That's the topic. It's been a bit of a hot topic over the past couple of weeks. And I just wanted to ask, like, more generally to all of the speakers here with us today, if do we think that this is where things are going in DeFi as a whole? Are there going to be sort of the same sort of traditional DeFi setups? They'll always still be with us, or is everything sort of going in this intense way? Or what do we think?
Well, I'll jump in and make a statement again and see if Fran and Anna want to disagree or want to correct me. But I think this intense framework has really come into vogue because of this multi-chain world we found ourselves in. And I think my thesis here, so if we step way back before we had roll-ups or layer twos, and we were talking about them, everybody was like, okay, well, we can't do, how do roll-ups work? They break composability in DeFi. They break atomicity. I can no longer like do flash loans or whatever. And this composability was like key and kind of core to what made DeFi interesting. And we went ahead and built L2s and all these other chains anyways, because the scalability concerns of Ethereum were just so real, like we needed cheaper block space. But in doing so, we broke composability. And I think my thesis or argument is that in a multi-chain world, an intense architecture allows us to emulate, it's not the same, but it allows us to emulate atomicity and composability across multiple chains by basically wrapping this kind of like intense concept on top and saying a user wants to just execute this intent, and it can look like it's being done as one atomic transaction because a market maker or a relayer is effectively taking the risk themselves of doing this. And so I think that this is an important UX improvement for multi-chain DeFi because it allows us to do a lot of the things that made single chain DeFi so interesting and exciting, but it does it by reintroducing this sort of market maker that requires capital to do a bunch of things. And I'm very curious how Fran and Anna react to that.
Yeah, from my side, no disagreement, but an addition. So I think intent-based infrastructure actually solves multiple problems. And I think it's also solving problems for a single blockchain environment. Specifically, I'm thinking about MEV, because if you are not solving MEV, and maybe just for context again, a maximum extractable value is what happens by reordering transactions in the public mempool. It allows external parties to extract values from user orders. And the problem is if this is not solved at application layer, but on the protocol level, then you automatically already expose MEV to some extent, and then you need to redistribute it. It's essentially what's happening. Like the whole MEV situation has literally led to what is now PBS, the proposer builder separation, because MEV is an issue. It leads to centralization because you by exposing MEV, You allow validators to gain, like the ones that are better in extracting MEV opportunities than others. They gain a larger share over time that generate a higher share of validate, like they become a larger validator network of Ethereum that poses some centralization risks. To avoid that, PBS was introduced, the proposer builder separation, which now splits the task of block building and validation into two separate roles. But it is working around the issue of the existence of MEV, but it is not solving it, right? Like it's basically meaning we are now making changes to the core protocol in order to circumvent MEV and find ways to redistribute MEV, push some of the MEV that is extracted to pay validators, to pay block builders, to pay searchers, and some of it goes back to the normal users. But it's causing overhead. It's requiring us to spend to leverage or to take up more Ethereum block space. And it is also a multi-million-dollar business that is extracting value of users. That is also not making me too bullish of new that is, in my view, hindering also adoption of Ethereum to some extent by knowing that MEV exists. And intent-based infrastructure allows applications already to avoid the exposure of MEV in the first place on Ethereum. And by avoiding this, you are minimizing or almost being able to abandon MEV on Ethereum. And I think that was also is a very important problem that is being solved with intent-based infrastructure. So I agree. I think the reason why it's becoming more and more popular now to talk about it and to adopt it is the multi-chain environment. But even within the single chain environment, intent-based can be solving serious problems.
Oh, Fran, sorry, I just realized that you are requesting. There we go.
Oh yeah, Fran got booted. Sorry, Fran.
Yeah, let me bring you up.
Yeah, Fran, do you have again, we can keep going with discussion, but sorry.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yep. Wait. Yeah, go. I'm sorry. Something was going weird with my phone. Keep going.
Anna, I was going to ask you. You mentioned how you feel CoWSwap's solving MEV by effectively taking the trades off chain, right? I wonder if solving is the right word, because really doesn't MEV simply occur somewhere else? Like obviously it's not MEV because there's no miners, but in a way, aren't solvers still in a position where they can profit from the job they're doing? And as a result, is the user really getting a completely fair deal? Or again, isn't it just in some ways an optimization and shifting the party that the benefits, as you said, with all the MEV solutions, you're just kind of splitting up the pie in a different way and giving different people the advantage. Isn't CoWSwap in a sense doing the same thing?
In a normal order flow auction model, I would probably agree with you, but I think what is special about CoWSwap is one thing is that the optimization criteria for the order flow auction is that you optimize for the user. So it's really the solvers are competing for finding the best price for the user. Even there, you could probably still find ways of when the competition isn't strong enough, you could see that probably there can be some, to some extent, value extracted from the user order. But then the real innovation on top that is facilitated via intents is that you are now able on CoWSwap to match user orders together, right? Like basically by batching multiple orders together and ensuring that all of them have one uniform clearing price. This is the real innovation of how you circumvent MEV, because the how MEV is currently exploited in the public mempool is by seeing that in a single Ethereum block, one asset that is as popular as USDC or Ether, there's many blocks where you find 10 different price points that across a spread of almost 1% for the same token in a single Ethereum block. Like there is a 1% price spread on one single asset. And this is where now, of course, the external parties can rearrange the transactions in a way that they can maximally extract value out of the different user orders. And by batching transactions on CoWSwap, by ensuring that each asset only has one single clearing price per block, you avoid this MEV.
Yeah, I understand the CoWSwap a bit better and completely agree. The only real solution to transaction ordering is to avoid ordering effectively. Like there's just no other real solution. Everything else is splitting the pie. So yeah, completely agree with that. And the product I mentioned at the beginning, Aqueduct, is doing the same thing effectively. They're batching. Everybody gets the same price at every block, and as a result, there's nothing to extract, right? And as you said, user trades have to be matched against each other. But yeah, Hart, going back to what you said at the beginning, I think as you mentioned, intents are a way to try and bring back that composability across all the networks. I'm not as optimistic as you personally. I think it's going to take probably quite a few years before we see real cross-chain composability because intents are actually pretty sophisticated stuff. And as much as it abstracts from the user, I think there are still some important abstractions that are missing. And I'm honestly fairly pessimistic about UX for the time being, but looking forward to be proven wrong.
Yeah, I think, Fran, on that, I think it's going to be really interesting to see. I think it's really driven by economics here, right? Where it's like if there is enough economics to develop a deep kind of filler solver, cross-chain filler solver market maker community, then we will have good UX, or we'll be able to emulate a nice cross-chain UX through this intense-like framework. But developing that might take a while. I do agree with you there. Yeah. Amanda, by the way, I think, I don't know what time we're supposed to end here, but should we take any questions or anything before we get too deep into this conversation?
Yeah, I do see we have Connor who is requesting, so I'll bring you up on stage. I was planning on ending in like 7 minutes. I'm so sorry, guys. This conversation truly could go on much longer, but there is another AMA to be had. But we'll have Connor come in, and I approved you to speak, Connor. So come on up and let me know if you have any questions.
Maybe we keep, oh, there we go.
Perfect. Thank you for the spaces. So I would just like to understand a little bit more from Anna on the CoWSwap side. Earlier you mentioned protocols submitting their own routes or their own DeFi interactions, so other solvers can pick this up. How would this framework look like?
I think you're referring to AMMs, or like any new liquidity source being able to standardize, like to provide the liquidity and make it easy for solvers to tap into, right? I think this is what you're referring to. And so yeah, and sorry, I just saw you unmuting, but I think that's what you meant. Okay. And the idea with the IP book, the liquidity pool book, is essentially that we provide a standard that makes it easy for solvers to integrate into this. Of course, still an integration has to happen on the side of the solvers, but right now it's extremely difficult to integrate new liquidity sources depending on how they're designed. If you look, for example, into balancer pools, they have very sophisticated logic, some of them, and then there's other innovative AMMs that are being rolled out on the market, and now think about not only having to integrate on Ethereum mainnet, balancer, UniSwap, SushiSwap, on Curve, who, except for UniSwap and SushiSwap, all have quite some different custom logic. Now think about also doing the same thing on Polygon, Binance Smart Chain, wherever, where a new set of AMMs is deployed with again different logic. And I think so that's where the complexity arises for solvers right now to understand how this logic works and how they can work around with it. Whereas the LP book would essentially create a standard that requires those AMMs to make the logic of the AMM so composed into a single standard for integration that makes it easy for solvers to connect to it. So the integration work still has to happen, but the ability for solvers to not having to understand each logic individually, but being able to follow a single standardized integration path is what makes it easier then for externals to integrate and adopt to our new liquidity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So for context, we are a solver in CoW, and we've already standardized a lot of these interactions ourselves, because we kind of saw that coming. Do you not think if you kind of create this framework for other solvers to use the standardization you make, then the solvers that have already thought about this lose their advantage? Do you not think it's kind of shifting the weights around a little bit?
I think solvers also are able to innovate on a lot of different things. Of course, having certain LP pools integrated is giving you a heads up, but I think this is also like working on the LP book is also something that would take quite some time for us to implement. If you were in one of the more recent, I think like the last few solver calls that we had, it's not currently something that we're pushing actively forward, but it is a solution that if we realize, and I think where the initial question arises from was like, how do you ensure that there's not too much of a centralization force in the solver ecosystem, which would be the case if we suddenly would realize, okay, there's only 2 solvers who are competing, and all others have fallen behind because they're not able to integrate like the more advanced liquidity pools anymore. Then integrating or like working on the LP book will overcome the centralization force. But as we currently have a very healthy solver decentralization, it's not top priority for us at the moment.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your question, Connor. And I think it's a perfect time to wrap things up. I think we had so many more questions planned, but this is a very in-depth topic and really hard to just have like a quick one sentence answer, right? So I just really want to thank Francesco and Hart too for just joining, and I'm sure everyone's like all over the world, so thanks for accommodating on the time zones and just taking your time today to chat with us about this super exciting topic.
We'll have to do another one. That was great. Thank you so much, Amanda, for setting us up.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for organizing.
And thank everyone for joining in the audience. And yeah, we'll have to do a round 2, seriously. There's a couple other people we wanted to join in the panel as well. So yeah, round 2 is coming up in the future at some point. And yeah, thank you guys, and we'll see you next time.